2 years since the Crusaders had to retreat from Damietta. It has been a peaceful time, and Saladin has used the time to strengthen Egypt. The economy improved, the army became bigger and stronger, and the defenses of major Egyptian cities were rebuilt. Saladin even went on the offensive against the Crusaders by sending troops to attack the border regions. Everything was going according to plan. But suddenly, the Fatimid Caliph in Cairo fell gravely ill. As he had no designated successor, Egypt was up for grabs after 2 centuries of Fatimid rule. Seismic changes were about to take place. Quick action was necessary to prevent the power vacuum in Cairo from undoing all the work of Saladin so far. Moreover, Saladin was under immense political pressure from Nuruddin and the Caliph in Baghdad to establish Sunni dominance in Egypt. And Saladin was the second most powerful person in the country, who was better suited to become the new king of Egypt. Upon the death of the last Fatimid Caliph, Al-Adid, Saladin had now the opportunity to establish his own dynasty. Thus begins the Ayyubid dynasty. This was uncharted territory for Saladin. He'd always had big plans, but until now he did not have the complete independence and the unmatched power to work on them. Egypt belongs to Saladin now, and he has total control of every aspect of it. And so begins Saladin's great leap forward. Immediately after sitting on the throne, he proclaimed the Caliph in Baghdad as Caliph, and Egypt became part of the Abbasid Caliphate. Saladin would be a semi-independent ruler, with the title Sultan of Egypt. Saladin was still theoretically under Nuruddin's command, and he did not want to damage that relationship. So Saladin arranged for a handsome annual tribute for Nuruddin, making sure that he had no opponent from the Muslim side to challenge his power in Egypt. Once the external support was ensured, Saladin focused on his own dynastic ambitions. No doubt the dream of freeing the Holy Lands was always burning inside of him, but he understood that he couldn't launch a campaign against the Crusaders unless he established a powerful empire in Egypt first. Saladin turned the wheel of change in Egypt. His council revised the tax codes, ensuring further revenue of the state, redistributed the lands, ensuring loyalty at local leadership levels, replaced the corrupted provincial officers with skilled officers, ensuring effective administration of the state, and less chance of conspiracy against the Ayyubids. Saladin showed everyone that when it comes to being a sultan, he had his own way of doing things. Syria under Nuruddin and Egypt under Saladin provided a perfect opportunity to attack the Crusader state, Kingdom of Jerusalem, from 2 different sides. A plan was drawn out. Both Nuruddin and Saladin started marching from their own capitals. But halfway to the battleground, Saladin returned to Cairo. Nuruddin found himself alone on the battlefield. He continued on with the assault, but ultimately the campaign was not successful. Until today, we do not know for sure why Saladin turned back. He wrote to Nuruddin about the possibility of a rebellion in Cairo in his absence, which many scholars argue was not a good enough reason. But what we know for sure is that this event caused a divide in the trust between Nuruddin and Saladin. And over time, this divide would only grow bigger. Although disappointed, Nuruddin was content with Saladin for the time being. He was still receiving the tribute from Egypt. However, Saladin's not showing up initiated a lot of rumors and conspiracy theories in the Zengid court. In general, it was seen by the Zengid emirs as Saladin's defiance of Nuruddin's command. In the meantime, Saladin was busy in Egypt. The steps he initially took after coming to power started bearing fruits. His army fought skirmishes in the southern and western boundaries of Egypt, launched a campaign against Yemen, and established a strong naval presence along the Red Sea coasts, thereby extending Saladin's control to Sudan, Mecca, Medina, and Yemen. Both his treasury and his political influence were enriched by these missions. Saladin won the heart and trust of the Egyptians, and people were ready to support his cause. But the more Saladin grew in power, the more mistrust and friction occurred between the Ayyubids and the Zengids. Eventually, the Zengid emirs were able to convince Nuruddin that his once deputy had now become too powerful and needed to be removed. In 1174, Nuruddin started preparing his army to invade Egypt, and Saladin began preparations to defend it. But during the preparation, Nuruddin suddenly fell ill and passed away after only a few days. Nuruddin's successor was his son Salih, only 11 years old. The news of Nuruddin's death reached Saladin. Undoubtedly, the death of his childhood hero and mentor had a massive impact on his state of mind. Although they were not on very friendly terms at the time of his death, Saladin always had great respect for Nuruddin, for his effort to unite the Muslims of Syria against the Crusaders. Yet Saladin was relieved to some extent, knowing that the civil war between Syria and Egypt would now be avoided. That night, Saladin went to the balcony of his quarters. As he looked towards the horizon beyond the vast expanse of his capital city, All the mixed feelings and thoughts regarding Nuruddin's death unfolded in his mind. Not only did this impact his personal feelings, but the news also had political implications. Nuruddin's death changed the entire geopolitical dynamics of the region. Surely the young son of Nuruddin won't be able to exercise the same power his father did. The power vacuum will create infighting among the Zengids. What actions should Saladin take now? To drive the Crusaders out of the Holy Lands, the existence of a strong Syria is essential. Without strong fronts in both Egypt and Syria, the ultimate victory against the Crusaders cannot be guaranteed. And without Nuruddin, Syria does not have that strength any longer. Should Saladin launch a campaign against the Crusaders on his own? But if Syria goes into the wrong hands, then the Crusaders could form a new alliance and outmatch Saladin's force. Should he then annex Syria first to prevent that? He could, but the values and Islamic teachings that he grew up with prevented him from doing so. He can't wage war against the family of his benefactor without any provocation. That would be hypocritical for him, making him unsuitable to lead the armies in the Holy Lands according to his own standards of belief. Certainly, Saladin was an ambitious man, but his ambition was not more important to him than his principles. He knew in his heart that if he wished to be successful in freeing the Holy Lands from the Crusaders, he had to do it in an honorable way. No political backstabbing and betrayal should be allowed to tarnish his lifelong goal. As the dawn broke and the call for prayer was announced from the minarets of the Grand Mosque of Cairo, Saladin could finally make up his mind. He decided to wait and not get involved in the political turmoil of Syria for the time being. His lifelong mission for the Holy Lands was put on pause. A few days later, a messenger reached Damascus with a letter from Saladin to Salih. The Sultan of Egypt had promised full support to the young prince and would always come to his aid whenever it was needed. As Saladin's letter reached Damascus, another message reached Saladin's court in Cairo. Egypt was under attack. A naval fleet of the Crusaders and the Sicilians laid siege on Alexandria, one of the most important cities in Egypt. The attackers had almost 200 warships, 40 transport ships, and more than 1,000 knights. It was a formidable assault, but this time Saladin was much more prepared than previous occasions. Soldiers and supplies were quickly sent to Alexandria to reinforce the defenders. The initial blow was heavy on the Muslims. All the warships and commercial vessels of the Muslims at the port of Alexandria were destroyed by the Sicilian invaders. But as the reinforcements reached the city, the defenders' morale was boosted. On the second day of the battle, when the invaders brought their siege towers near the wall of Alexandria, the Muslim defenders burst out of the gates in a surprise attack and did their best to hit the enemy's morale. They burnt down the siege towers, ravaged the enemy camps, and took away large amounts of weaponry and treasure. This was a serious blow to the invaders. As the siege dragged on for days, the invaders started to lose strength. They needed reinforcements, but the promised reinforcements never arrived from the Crusader states. That was because King Amalric died suddenly of dysentery in Jerusalem. His kingdom was passed on to his 13-year-old son Baldwin IV, who was suffering from leprosy. This sudden death of Amalric prevented the Crusaders from sending the promised supplies to the battlefield. Ever the diplomat, Saladin quickly initiated a truce between him and the new Crusader king, leaving the Sicilians alone to fight in the battle. Simultaneously, Saladin started marching towards Alexandria with a huge army. The Sicilians had to accept defeat. What could have been the biggest threat to Saladin's reign actually brought yet another victory through his military and diplomatic prowess. But not all the news was good. Back in Syria, the young prince Salih became a pawn in the fighting among the top Zengid leaders. The prince was in Aleppo, and the emir of Aleppo, Gumush wanted to use his guardianship over the prince to establish his own political influence in Syria and kill the other emirs in the region, starting with Damascus. A political rival of the emir of Aleppo was Saif al-Din, the emir of Mosul, but he refused to come to the aid of Damascus when requested. So seeing no other way, the emir of Damascus had to ask for support from Saladin. This request gave Saladin the legitimacy to get involved in the power struggle in Syria. Saladin had to act quickly. There was no time to assemble a large army and spend several weeks marching towards Syria. He took 700 of his best horsemen and rushed towards Damascus. To save time, he even went through Crusader territories, Kerak and Shubak. Although a very risky maneuver, it proved fruitful. Saladin traveled so quickly through enemy territory that the Crusaders could not do anything about it. In the end, Saladin reached Damascus even before Gumushtagin's army started marching towards the city. This was a brilliant move by Saladin, as Damascus now came under his control without any serious resistance. It saved plenty of time, resources, and bloodshed. The people of Damascus welcomed Saladin with open arms as their protector. After establishing his base in Damascus over the next few days and gathering more local force, Saladin quickly moved towards Aleppo, laid siege on the city, and demanded the guardianship of the prince, Salih. But, one dark night during the siege of Aleppo, while Saladin was discussing plans with his emirs in a private tent, someone rushed into the tent from the darkness. He was dressed in black and had a bare knife in his hand. He jumped onto Saladin in an attempt to stab him with the knife. This was Saladin's first encounter with the secret cult called the Assassins. We will discuss more about them in future videos. So far we have seen Saladin's rise in power and winning one victory after another. As we further explore the events of his life, we will see a new chapter unfold. A chapter full of struggles, stalemates, and challenges. A period in which Saladin spends most of his time and effort fighting his fellow Muslims rather than the Crusaders.